Welcome, everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. Those of you who follow the show regularly may have noticed that I really haven't been around much the last couple of weeks. In fact, I haven't had a show at all. And the 2 weeks before that were mostly interviews with our wonderful special guest, Cavell Doffer, who also happens to be my husband. There was a reason for that, and that is that I just had kind of a nasty virus that went on for a couple of months, and it really affected my voice. Now, thankfully, it's nearly gone, but that's why this show's going to be a little bit shorter. I really wanted to do a recording because I am improving, and I'd like to get back to my listeners, but I'm not sure how long I can go. So rather than do a long piece or looking into the future, which we may do in the next week or two. I think I'm about ready to do some ratings again. But for this week, I thought we'd go back to Ask a Psychic a Question. And the question I decided to look at for this week was one I get a lot, which is, what is a soulmate? And it's one of the most common questions I get asked as a reader. It's based on the similar question I usually get, which is he or is she the one for me? And it's probably the most common question, followed by, and are they my soulmate? The variations of this type of question, and even the answers, are pretty endless, but most of the questions are based on the fact that single people who are not part of a couple wish that they were. This is kind of normal. I mean, not everybody wants a partner, but in general, most people are kind of wired that way. And even those who are relatively happy with unattached often can't help but feel a bit left out when the whole world seems to be celebrating the joys of romantic love and partnership. Even more unhappy are those unfortunate souls who have just undergone a breakup or the loss of their partner. For them, every singles website, every signpost, and every supermarket candy box, especially around Valentine's Day and other holidays, it's just a reminder of what they had once and they no longer have, that they lost it. It's like taking salt and rubbing it into a wound, and it just increases the pain without solving the problem. And because of the way humans are wired, we keep hurting for a long while after something like this happens, and being reminded in this way just tends to make it worse. Now, whatever you personally think of being part of a couple, it's impossible to totally escape the cultural push towards being in one. For many people, especially those who are lonely, this constant push by the culture, by media, and even well-meaning friends can bring up a long, simmering desire for love and romance that then makes them depressed because they don't have one at the moment. They may start to wonder, is there ever going to be anyone out there for me? In recent decades, and this is really fairly recent, this has been combined with the popular idea of, quote, finding my soulmate, unquote. Now, there are plenty of web pages that suggest they will help you find such a person, if only you will pay them a little money and put in your ad. Notice they don't say, we'll help you find someone who shares your interests, your life goals, or even would like to enter the married state. Oh, I mean, they may say that later. That's not the hook they're trying to catch you with. No, the hook they suggest that you will find your soulmate. This word is never defined and has become one of those combination of words that I think everyone just thinks they know what it means. But if you ask 5 different people, what is a soulmate? You're going to get 5 different answers. This makes the concept of soulmate a great word for advertisers to use if they want you to desire something so they can sell you something you think will help you get it, but they don't really have to define what it is. For them, it's actually more helpful if you're not sure exactly what it is. But for you, not knowing what you're looking for can make things very frustrating and even depressing. After all, if you don't even know what you're looking for, how can you know when or even if you have found it? So in this show, I'm going to talk about the popular idea of soulmates, where the idea comes from, and what many metaphysical and psychic experts feel they really are. If you have not gone much beyond the singles ads or Hollywood movies, some of these answers may surprise you. However, remember, these are still only theories. These aren't rules and hard facts. Every relationship among human beings is unique. This includes normal family and friends, but is especially true of romantic relationships. Just because your relationship doesn't seem to fit in with one of the following sections does not mean it will not work, or that there's something wrong with it or with you. Many of the best romantic relationships that go on for many years start out only as friends first. In their own way, they can be among the most long-lasting of soulmates for a number of reasons. But first, let's look at the more common ideas about soulmates and what they are considered to be. Now, the origin of the modern idea of having a soulmate, loosely defined in popular culture as that one and only special person that will complete your life and make it perfect, may go back to the classical times, when some ancient Greek writers thought that people were once both male and female in one body. Now, we no longer believe this, but this was a common concept, so we're just going to go with that as the basis behind the philosophy. And at some point, it was believed the gods separated them, and ever since, people are always seeking their other half. You still see hints of this idea today, even, and when it's combined with the concept of reincarnation, that is the idea of living more than one lifetime, this idea kind of morphs into looking for your other half from one lifetime to another. While this idea is attractive in some ways, it does leave a large number of people in the lurch and does not explain everything that comes up in real life. For example, what about those who prefer to have love relationships with members of their own gender? The old idea being that you were male and you started out combined and you were male and female, so you once more again must make male and female. That doesn't work so well if the person you're looking for is the same gender as you. Or if we have only one better half, who has somehow gotten lost? Why do some people have several happy and long-lasting marriages with different partners during their lifetime? I'm not even talking about divorce here. I mean, in recent years, divorce has become a more common reason for separation than being widowed, but that doesn't mean that a first or second marriage to someone you thought was your soulmate, does that mean they were a mistake? Was it mistaken identity? What about your current partner? And again, for those people who've been widowed, and sometimes this happens, if you have two wonderful, very happy, long-lasting relationships, which one is your soulmate? If there's actually only one soulmate, you see kind of the problem with this. And you can see how this can get pretty complicated pretty fast. I would like to put forward another theory of soulmates, one that is not quite as romantic in some ways as the Hollywood idea of the one and only perfect partner, but does fit a little better into a metaphysical or, a spiritual worldview. And that is the idea that we all have many, or at least several, potential soulmates that we might encounter during our lifetimes. These are people whom, before you were born, you may have chosen to have some sort of interaction with. If you accept the popular metaphysical theory of reincarnation, these are likely to be people that you've interacted with before, souls that you've known before, perhaps as lovers, sometimes close friends, maybe other family members like a brother or sister or a parent. Basically, the soul group gets together and decide that you have certain lessons that you want to explore in the schoolroom we call life on Earth. So you set things up so you might meet and interact. How you choose to play out that interaction will be your own choices when the time comes. This is where I don't believe everything is fated. We kind of set this up like a chess game, then, we have the individual will when we're doing it to move our pieces. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation, you can get a similar theory around the idea that God or the Creator, as you view them, sends certain people into our lives so that we can learn love, gain wisdom, and generally grow up or grow closer to God. And again, he or she, if you feel it's a goddess, may send people into our lives. But it's our own decisions and actions that will paint the final picture of what these interactions ultimately look like. In the multi-soulmate universe, things begin to make a lot more sense. If you are at any given time, there are 3 or 4 people running around the planet that you have, say, soul knowledge with. Some people might use the term karma, but so that's cause and effect. So I'd go more with soul knowledge, knowing each other. Then basing your life on frantically finding just the right person becomes slightly less important. It is important to find the right person in the sense of being right for you or at the right time, but it doesn't put so much burden on one entity. It will also put less stress on any current or future love interest you may encounter, and that can be a very heavy burden of thought as you think the only person in the universe who will fit a certain slot. I mean, I think this is really our problem with modern society and this idea of soulmate, is thinking that there's only just one soul out there that will do everything for us. And does this mean that some people don't fall for the stranger across the crowded room, otherwise known as love at first sight? No, because we know what does happen. It happened to me. Does this mean that lasting relationships never start out that way? Of course they do sometimes. But just as some very lucky couples who really do seem to find our perfect fit for each other, finishing each other's sentences, and pretty much living happily ever after until death do they part, it's rare. It does happen, and the thing is, sometimes it even happens a second time. In fact, a very happy first relationship often leads to a second happy one. Probably because someone who's learned how to live comfortably in one good relationship will bring those skills into the next, and also be aware of the kind of partner who will share well with them. Sadly, the opposite's also true. People with unhappy first partnerships tend to be unhappy in the next ones, and so on down the line. Could it really be that sometimes in our search for the perfect soulmate, we're overlooking the people already close to us? That's the $64,000 question. And could it be also that sometimes when the person we have decided is our soulmate proves to be human, in other words, they don't meet our every single perfect need, we become disillusioned and we may break off the relationship feeling we've made some sort of mistake. This can't possibly be my soulmate because they're not perfectly living up to this imaginary and wonderful idea that I've been sold by Hollywood and by some really fun but unfortunately misguided fantasy novels that have come out over the last few years. You know, if we accept the idea that soulmates are potential partners in life's journey, rather than solutions to all of our life's problems, we may be more open to the joys of friendship that we find every day. In doing so, we may also open our eyes to the actual soulmates we are already journeying alongside of. As we learn to make friends and enjoy each other's company, we are more apt to become people that our potential romantic soulmates are likely to take notice of. It doesn't matter so much if that notice strikes like lightning across a crowded room like it did with me or my husband, or more slowly over the weekly study group that you all meet together with, or the person that you see at the bus stop every morning and chat with. What is important is that the notice occurs, and when it's mutual, it can become the foundation for love, romance, and yes, even discovering, oh, by the way, we seem to be soulmates. This doesn't mean that you necessarily want to stop searching for love or not dating nice people at all. It just means it is a good idea to be aware of others and see them as potential friends as well as potential lovers. After all, think about what most people say about the couple that they consider to be soulmates, any couple that they know. Very often they describe such couples as, they are so much in love. They're each other's best friend. They're true soulmates. Now, think about the middle part of that description. And realize the best friend part of the description is as much a part of the couple as being in love. This is going to be something to seriously remember when we continue forward on this topic of readings, romances, and soulmates. Then that's because people can be soul attracted for all kinds of reasons. While all of them may have a life lesson involved in the encounter, not all of them make for great long-term partnerships, or even pleasant, nurturing, or fun. An important thing to remember when looking for that special person in your life is that you want someone who helps uphold you as you uphold them. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Very often, psychics end up seeing people involved in relationships in which the client really believes is all about love and giving, but after a few moments, it becomes pretty obvious to the psychic reader that the client is the one doing almost all the loving and any giving that may be going on. I hear over and over again when the cards and runes point out the relationship may be rather one-sided, the usually woman will say, "But he's my soulmate, and I love him." Well, as this show is designed to point out, he may really be a soulmate with you, and you very well probably love him. The question is the soul attraction a healthy one that uplifts and brings joy to both partners, or is it a destructive one, likely to result in heartbreak, sadness, and worry for at least one of the two people in question, and usually for both of them in the long run? Few relationships are black and white, so especially if a relationship is already ongoing, and even more so if there's children involved. A psychic will usually try to tread pretty lightly at first, unless they sense immediate or urgent danger to a client. Usually when that's the case, the client will themselves blurt out something that raises a big red flag for me anyway, and any good reader keeps a list of phone numbers or at least suggestions for places to refer clients that they're really concerned about, to whatever is appropriate, very often suggesting they see their doctor, go to standard couples counseling, talk to their pastor, or even the number for the local battered women's shelter if things are that bad. Now, I'm concentrating on women here because men do this as well, but less frequently will they tell a psychic. This tends to be more the sort of problem that women bring to psychics. Men probably talk to other people, and I do get it occasionally, but much more often it's usually the woman. So I'm not being sexist here when I say her. This is more commonly what I see. But most of the times, things are just not quite that grim. We're not talking battered women's shelter time. And they're usually not that clear. Rather, it's just that we have, a description of two people, one of whom sitting in front of me, who feel an intense attraction to each other, or at least they did at the start. But for some reason, things are breaking down and they're just not working out. At this point, a careful look at why things are not working out, and a gentle reminder that both people in a relationship have to work at it. If things are going to be sorted out, it is generally given by one reader, when we get the response again, "But we're soulmates." And you usually have to repeat 4 or 5 times this idea that the media got it wrong, at least in my opinion, And that just because someone has a deep soul attraction to you or with you does not mean the best person to spend the rest of your life with, especially if they are not doing anything to try to hold the relationship together. Sometimes people do come together for a time and later part from each other, sometimes in goodwill or often in anger, but it does not invalidate what they had. It just sort of means that one or both of them weren't able to crack through the issues that probably brought them together in the first place. Other times, people really do mate for life. But we need to also remember that life during most of human history was a lot shorter than it is for people now. So, some people lived to be married for 70 years and died in bed apart in their 90s, a few hours apart. But that was really, really rare. It's not even common now, but it was really rare, say, 300 years ago. The majority of adults probably had more than one spouse in their lifetime if they lived past being teenagers. And while divorce would be less common, becoming a widower or widower was just as painfully accepted part of life as was the tendency to remarry afterwards, especially in Europe. You see headstones with people, a man or a woman buried with several spouses beside them, and it's not that they were ever divorced, it's just that they kept remarrying and they lived long enough. Of course, not nearly as many people married for love either, and that's an important thing to remember. It's something that most modern people do enjoy the chance to at least try to do. And we pretty much take that for granted in the West, that we're going to do that. And actually, for most of human history, marriage and love were not necessarily the same thing. But in modern times, the media and the culture keep trying to sell us that love is all you need to make a relationship. And I think most modern adults don't tend to think much beyond that point, unless, at least before they get married. The major thing they're thinking of is, does he or she give me goosebumps and light up my life when they're first courting? Strong couples, particularly when we marry for love as a basis, do need some romance and attraction. I do run into this occasionally, people just thinking they will make it work, and if there's absolutely no romance or attraction to start out with, that makes it very, very hard. Having it go away later is a different topic, and has potentially different solutions. But just if you meet someone and they're really nice and you're getting to be a little bit older and everybody's telling you you should like them, but there's nothing there, that's usually not a really good basis either. But that aside, there's also got to be some friendship and common ground along with the romance and attraction, or it probably just isn't going to work in the long term. There are no fast or hard rules, the degree to which one or the other a couple have to have. Only that a relationship based totally on mutual attraction, even of the seemingly soulmate variety, is likely to end up with a lot of confusion and potential heartache if other factors like compatibility, not necessarily being the same, but compatible ideas on things like, where are we going to live? How many children do we want? Do we want any kids? What sort of life goals do we have? Things like that have to at least be talked out and explored. Being a soulmate does not automatically end the need for serious communication and compromises. It may help them go more smoothly, especially like negotiations on where you're going to live. It makes things click along easier, but it won't make the needs for thoughts and discussions go away. And again, this is where there's a strong tendency in our culture, especially with the whole soulmate idea, to believe and be taught, especially if all you did was we're very influenced by things like Hollywood and books. Even those of us that don't pretend to pay a lot of attention to them, they still influence us in the way we think. And there's a tendency to think the other person, they know me so well, the relationship is just so cosmic that a partner will just know right away what the other partner wants. Now, this type of thinking is not only not true even when the partners may themselves share a higher than the usual psychic bond, but relying on that bond alone, even if you have a certain amount of psychic communication with your partner, can cause a great deal of unhappiness. Of course, most readers see people because in fact they are unhappy, although we do get a wonderful exception to that, and those tend to make our day. I mean, most people that we see in our office as a psychic, it's usually because they aren't happy. And when we see exceptions to that, that's really great. But when this sort of confusion or expectation is going on, the cards will almost always show this, that the people are just not communicating. And the client may have to work beyond the soulmate bit emotionally before they can deal with the fact that there are still issues that have to be talked about. In many ways, the whole idea of soulmates has taken over from this older idea of being in love with love. And people become concerned not only about finding a soulmate, but then deciding that because there were problems in the relationship, that the partner must not be their soulmate, because after all, if they were their soulmate, they would always understand everything about them and everything they wanted and everything they needed without even talking to each other. In other words, they think they've made a mistake, when in reality, having issues to work on is what is most likely to have made the relationship a real soul mating, if you will. If there was nothing to work on as a couple, then the two of you would probably never have had any serious attraction in the first place. Now, does this mean that all bad relationships are soulmates? Well, not exactly. Not defined in the modern sense, or the way we use karmic sense, or soul group attractions. You know, the idea that parents and children and different people, we come together. But everyone understands that sometimes romantic partners just seem fated to be together, and they're drawn as if outside forces come together. This really does happen. I mean, I've seen it. We've all seen it. Couples who just seem that the stars align right and they come together, blah, blah, blah. But even, we all know also that not everyone is destined to have that kind of starstruck romance. And even people that do, my point is they need to work on the relationship itself, rather than simply expect the soul attraction to hold everything together. There is no automatic happily ever after without a certain amount of work. And that gets me to the point, as a reader, I see the most often. The breakdown that occurs when, after time, the first soul attraction has faded for one of the partners, most often, but again, not always, it's the man who fades first. And the other partner, usually the woman, but not always, is baffled, hurt, and desperate to get things back the way they were. This is where, as a psychic reader, you have to be very careful, because often the client simply isn't ready for the whole truth. And they may demand the reader keep asking the cards the same question over and over in slightly different ways, hoping for a different answer. This is a disadvantage to using a deck like the side cards, where sometimes the answer can be pretty obvious to the client. You know, it's hard if a client asks flat out, will he leave me? And the yes card comes up as the first one. You know, I really like my sidecar deck most of the time because it enables the average person to understand the answers. But sometimes, you know, the cards can be blunt and the message may not be what people want to hear. But usually, let's say the hypothetical person is asking the question, usually is she, you know, will he leave me? And the card comes up, yes. And the next question is, the next statement is nearly always, but he's my soulmate, or I thought we were soulmates. Now, usually, deep down, the client already kind of knows that he or she is thinking of leaving with the cards do this. They very seldom do this when no one doesn't have a clue. You know, that's why they came in for reading in the first place. They're kind of hoping it isn't true, but they also kind of want to know the truth. You know, the best thing a psychic can do at this point, or a best friend for that matter, is just to get the person to talk. And usually it all spills out. You know, you don't really need cards for that. This is where being a good listener comes in. If they don't talk, then you gently have to explain that while their own love may be a deep well from which, you know, all things spring, and a person may indeed have a soul attraction to them, or did, it takes two people to have a real relationship. One person cannot make the decision to make it work. This often takes the better part of the entire client session to get across, and a good reader will suggest hopeful things, again, like couples counseling. And, you know, sometimes, once in a while, you hear back that happily the other person agreed there was an issue. uh, and some differences, and went to counseling and helped got it sorted out. And everyone is now, if not like wonderfully overjoyed, at least they're on an even keel and they're still together. But much more often, the person does leave if they were already intending to. I mean, that is the partner that was disenchanted. And then if the client comes back, we have to go over the whole soulmate discussion thing again, because again, they thought they were their soulmate and now they're gone. What does that mean? Frankly, I wish the overall culture would quit pushing the overall romantic ideal of the perfect partner, perfect soulmate on people, because it just raises expectations that frankly no human being can ever meet, at least not all the time. Like the older idea that came before it that you see in things from the 50s, from say my parents' generation, of there's the one for everybody. The idea of soulmates is somewhat of a cosmic myth. But like all good myths, it has a little basis in reality. There's some truth to it. It is simply that the reality in question isn't quite what people expect. And even when they find that sort of serious attraction, love at first sight type relationships, they're just not exactly what they think that they expect them to be. Love at first sight exists, some endure for a lifetime, but they're not the only kind of love. They're not the only kind of romantic partnership either. And many people will have perfectly wonderful and fulfilling romantic lives without this particular sort of total bonding experience that they write about in the whole soulmate literature. I mean, all good and healthy romantic relationships have a spark of this. But it doesn't really matter if you meet your beloved with a gaze across a crowded room, or gradually over 3 years in the teacher's lounge. The important thing is there has to be that deep friendship under the sparks for things to really work. And it is also important to keep in mind that we are attracted to people that bring us life lessons as well as joy. And while all people have their ups and downs, no relationship should be permanently one-sided. I'm not talking about caretaking for someone who's actually ill. What I mean is if one partner is always doing all the emotional taking and the other all the emotional giving, that's a recipe for disaster. It's very different from, your loved one has an accident or something and you wind up caring for them in sickness and in health. That's different because presumably there's still some give and take going there, even on the part of the carer and the caregiver. But psychics see that, when one person just decides to sort of lay down themselves emotionally and become a doormat, and the other person's all taking, the psychics see that sort of martyrdom all the time. And once again, the whole soulmate thing is almost always attached to it. Not always, but it's very common. In general, I'm not a fan of encouraging people to break things off. That's not my role. Once they're serious, people usually, it's not my place to tell them to stop the relationship. Now, the very early stages of romance, like, I've been on one date with so-and-so, that's another story. If things look really bad, I'll usually lay that out and say, well, you never want to live your life according to a card reading, but looking at these cards, I would be very cautious. I could say that. But if it's really ongoing, you don't want to you want to give people options, but not tell them what to do. However, if one partner is truly selfish and demanding, and the other is totally serving their every emotional whim, things can become so toxic that, I may be able to see that separation is a good idea. Again, I will hopefully not be the one to have to really suggest this unless the cards do it for me, but I may suggest they talk to somebody who will probably also tell them the same thing, like a marriage counselor. What I tell people when the cards hint at something like this, though, is that they go with their heart and their gut. And perhaps the advice of close friends and family, that's another really important point. Usually at this point, a client will admit they've already had advice leaning in that direction from family or friends, at which point I pull out the old man Landers comment of, only you can decide if you're better with this person or without them. Again, most of the time when people come, they kind of sort of know, not always, but usually, and again, if you let them talk, this will come out. But enough of what can go wrong with everything. I mean, to some of general soulmates do exist, but there are much more complex and nuanced groups of relationships than your local astrology column or Hollywood movie would indicate. To a degree, all relationships that are a series type are a kind of soulmate relationship. But the type proclaimed in the media is so rare, that really intense and high level romance, it has to morph into a more relaxed pattern for daily living, because no one can live at that level all the time. And human beings, no matter how compatible, still have to work at their relationships in the long run. For most people, there are probably 4 or 5 individuals alive at any time with whom a soulmate relationship is possible. The idea of the one is only true in the sense of them being the right one for you to pick out now, and who is going to work out best for you in the long term. You do, however, always want to make sure that that pull you feel when meeting a potential romantic partner doesn't blind you to the person as a human being, and make sure you get to know them before settling seriously into a relationship with them if you can. And if you jump into a relationship right away across a crowded room, you are in fact still going to have to get to know them. If you can manage that, you have a much better chance of being someone's reader's happy reading of the day, the one where the question of is he or she the one for me is not only yes, but oh my goodness, yes. And I want to tell people, my readers, that my listeners, that we love clients like this. It's so wonderful, when you get couples who are really working, because they exist. Now, that about sums up my thoughts on this matter. A lot of this show is based on an article I did about 10 years ago for Planet Star's Mystic Living magazine, but I've had almost 10 years of thoughts and observations since then. I have to say, though, that most of them still go along most of the same lines. 10 years has, if anything, but confirmed most of what I noticed then and continue to see today. Now, remember, all of this is only my own opinions on the topic. Many good people do disagree, so take what works for you and kind of ignore the rest of it. But at least think about these ideas a bit. Most of us just tend to accept what our culture and our friends and our world throw at us without thinking it through. That's not a bad thing. That's just how human beings are wired. So what I'm trying to do is trying to look at this concept and make us think about it. Know what you mean for yourself when you use the word soulmate, and you're likely to be happier as long as you've defined it. And again, I want to thank everybody for being with me this evening. I'm sorry this one's a bit short, but I hope you did enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to getting back in the swing of things. My voice is about to go, so I think I'm going to close on the topic for now, but I really appreciate it. And as always, if you have questions or comments or want to suggest show topics or even volunteer as a guest, you can contact me at Melodi Reader, that's MELODIREADER, @gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from all my listeners, and I look forward to seeing you again next time here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.